I'm back, Webster.
Oh, hi, Miss Sandy.
I just checked with the pilot. We're ready to roll.
Remember when a fast food commercial accidentally created one of the most recognizable sitcoms of the 1980s? Premiering on ABC in 1983, Webster followed Webster Long, played by Emmanuel Lewis, a young boy adopted by former NFL star George Papadopoulos, played by Alex Karras, and his sharp, warm wife Catherine, played by Susan Clark after the tragic loss of his parents. What started as a mismatched family comedy quickly became one of the decade's most beloved sitcoms. Audiences showed up for Webster's charm, George's gruff but soft heart, and Catherine's ongoing mission to keep the whole household from completely unraveling. The show ran on ABC until 1987, and then pulled off one of television's rare survival stories by moving to first-run syndication until 1989, eventually landing at 150 total episodes. Today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about Webster that you probably never knew. And yes, it all started with a Whopper. But the biggest thing that Emmanuel Lewis was selling the entire time Webster was on the air? Well, his age. Stick around for number one, because the numbers, they don't add up the way you think. Hey, before we dive in, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a deep dive into classic television. All right, who's ready to move in with the Papadopouloses? Number 15. Webster was born from a Burger King commercial. Now, every show has an origin story, and Webster's is one of the strangest in network television history, and it starts improbably at a fast food counter. In 1982, ABC programming chief Lou Ehrlich saw a Burger King commercial featuring a young actor named Emmanuel Lewis.
In the early 80s, Emmanuel Lewis appeared in commercials for Burger King and other brands.
The ad itself was completely unremarkable. Kid eats burger, kid looks charming, 30 seconds, boom, done. But Ehrlich was transfixed. By all accounts, his reaction was immediate and not particularly subtle. He wanted that kid on ABC, and he wanted it figured out immediately. The only problem was that ABC had no show for him. There was no script sitting in development, no premise ready to go, no vehicle waiting in the garage. So the network did something truly unusual. Rather than build something from scratch, they grabbed an existing pilot, that adult romantic comedy, Another Ballgame, and dismantled it entirely. The married couple at the center of the show suddenly acquired an adopted son. The title changed, the premise changed, and the entire show changed. All of it reworked around a kid from a Burger King commercial. Now, the pilot episode still carries the seams of that last-minute reconstruction. A script originally built around two lead characters had to be hastily rewired around an entirely different star. Number 14. The couple playing TV spouses were actually married. For all the behind-the-scenes chaos over titles and creative control, Webster had one thing going for it that most sitcoms spend entire seasons trying to manufacture. The two adults playing TV spouses were actually married in real life. Alex Karras and Susan Clark tied the knot in 1980.
My husband, Alex Karras, with a testimonial for Lazy Boy Chair.
3 years before Webster ever hit ABC. So when George and Catherine Papadopoulos bickered, bantered, and fumbled their way through sudden parenthood on screen, audiences were watching a couple who already had the whole routine down cold. And the story goes back even further than the wedding. The two first met in 1975 when co-starring in the TV movie Babe, where they also played a married couple. Pretending to be spouses on camera, I guess it went well enough that they decided to stop pretending. By the time Webster came along, Karras and Clark had added producing partners to their resume. They formed Georgian Bay Productions, which co-produced the series. Creator Stu Silver reportedly leaned into their real-life dynamic heavily, believing that it gave the show a kind of effortless married couple energy that you simply can't manufacture in a casting session. Number 13. Emmanuel Lewis had a full pop career in Japan. Webster made Emmanuel Lewis famous in America, but Japan took one look at that and said, oh, no, we can do way more than that. While the show was pulling solid ratings stateside, something completely different was happening across the Pacific. In Japan, Lewis had crossed well past popular TV kid territory and was a full-blown pop culture phenomenon. And then it got weirder. Lewis released music in Japan, an actual album. His single, City Connection, climbed to number 2 on the Oricon charts.
Let's make a night connection, baby.
Japan's equivalent of Billboard. He followed it up with another single called Love is Dandan. Webster had a pop career. Yeah, but the entertainment empire didn't stop there. He also starred in a TV movie made exclusively for Japanese audiences called Samurai in New York. Because obviously, when you're an international sensation in the 80s, the next logical step is suiting up as a samurai in Manhattan. Yeah, sure, why not? And the cherry on top was that Webster aired in Japan for 5 years on NTV, under the title Laugh with the City Connection Boy and His Fat Father. Not exactly poetry, but points for honesty. Number 12. Alex Karras almost walked away before the show even started. Alex Karras spent years building a post-football career as a legitimate actor. So when the show that he signed on for suddenly transformed into a child-centered sitcom built around a kid, his enthusiasm took a serious hit. Karras reportedly hated the idea. He'd invested real time developing what was supposed to be an adult ensemble comedy, and watching it get dismantled and rebuilt around a cute kid and life lessons, that wasn't really part of the plan. For a stretch, he absolutely considered walking away from the whole thing, but Clark talked him off the ledge. She not only encouraged him to stay, but to help manage the tense early dynamic with ABC during the first season. Karras listened, and then something unexpected happened. The former NFL defensive tackle, the same guy millions knew as Mongo from Blazing Saddles, turned in one of the warmest performances of his entire career as George Papadopoulos.
Not really. I grabbed my baby brother and took out my sled and...
By the third season, he'd fully settled into the role, and his bond with Emmanuel Lewis became one of the genuine emotional cores of the series. The man who feared being typecast in a cute kid sitcom ended up being a big part of why the cute kid sitcom actually worked. Susan Clark, as usual, was right. Number 11. Doctors examined Lewis and came up empty. At the height of Webster's run, an entire team of medical professionals had to examine Emmanuel Lewis, and they walked away completely stumped. Not because something was wrong, but because nothing was. His growth hormones were normal, his systems were functioning exactly as they should, every test came back clean. The doctors had no condition to diagnose, no syndrome to point to, no explanation to offer. The medical community essentially looked at Emmanuel Lewis, shrugged in unison, and then moved on. Now for context, the comparison to Gary Coleman was unavoidable at the time. Coleman's small stature had a well-documented cause, a kidney condition that affected his growth from childhood. That was a known quantity with a medical file behind it. But Lewis had none of that. His situation had no file, no label, no neat answer. Some specialists pointed toward genetics. Short stature reportedly ran through his mother's family, and a late growth spurt was floated as a possibility, but it never happened.
You may be a size 8, but when it comes to trouble, you're a 42 long.
By adulthood, Lewis stood at 4 foot 3 inches, and the conversation quietly ended there. The actual weird fact isn't that Emmanuel Lewis was small, it's that nobody, not one doctor, not one specialist, could ever tell you why. Number 10, his mother had to ban the studio from picking up the star. Now, most behind-the-scenes problems on a network sitcom involve script, scheduling, or someone's ego. Webster had all of those, presumably, but it also had a problem that was completely unique in television history. People kept picking up the star of the show. Emmanuel Lewis looked so small and young that cast and crew members regularly forgot that they were standing next to a lead actor of a sitcom. Instead, their instincts kicked in and they treated him like a toddler who wandered onto the wrong lot. That included physically picking him up and carrying him around like he's a human mascot. His mother, Margaret Lewis, who was closely involved in managing his career, watched this happen long enough before deciding it needed to stop. She went directly to Paramount Television and requested a formal order to be issued to the entire production. Cast, crew, everyone instructed them to stop picking up Emmanuel Lewis. The order stood for the remainder of the series. Presumably, everyone involved had to find a different way to express their affection for a kid who was, again, just trying to do his job.
What happens tomorrow when I'm not here? It's gonna be one of you.
Number 9, Science Gone Bad gave us The Mansion. Now, for the first stretch of the series, the Papadopoulos family lived in a perfectly normal high-rise apartment. And then Webster got his hands on a chemistry set. The writers needed a reason to relocate the entire family, and their solution was to let a child burn the apartment down with science on a family sitcom. Nobody ever called Child Protective Services, and the Papadopoulos family was suddenly in the market for a new home.
Mrs. Parker? Could we please see the house?
What they landed in was something else entirely. A sprawling Victorian mansion with secret passages built into the walls, hidden stairways, and a grandfather clock that swung open into a full secret playroom. A grandfather clock that opened into a secret room on a network sitcom in 1985. Webster used those passages constantly, sneaking around the house, vanishing mid-argument, materializing in rooms that he had no business being in. For a kid his size, that mansion was basically a theme park with better furniture. The house was real too. Exterior shots were filmed at the Charles K. Miller House, an actual historic Victorian mansion in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood, a genuine landmark that spent a decade being remembered primarily as the place where a fictional child hid behind a clock. In 2016, it reportedly hit the market for about $9.5 million. Somewhere in Chicago, there's a nearly $10 million mansion that an entire generation still thinks of as the house Webster blew his way into. Number 8. Lewis received death threats at the height of his fame. Now, from the outside, Webster was about as wholesome as television got in the 80s. Adorable kid, loving family, life lessons wrapped up in like 22 minutes. But behind the scenes, it was a completely different story. At the height of the show's popularity, Emmanuel Lewis was receiving death threats, actual disturbing targeted threats directed at a kid who was still in his early teens. Now, most of it never reached him directly. His momager, Margaret Lewis, intercepted the threatening mail and handled the security concerns herself, quietly absorbing the worst of it so her son could keep showing up to work without carrying that weight. Lewis later revealed that some of the hostility came from extremists who targeted him specifically because of his visibility as a high-profile black child star at the center of a transracial adoption storyline. For a small but ugly segment of the audience, that representation was enough to make him a target. The public heard almost none of it at the time. The producers wanted to protect the show's image. His family also wanted to protect him, so Margaret Lewis kept it simple. She drove him to and from the set herself every day, keeping his world as contained and safe as she possibly could. So yeah, behind the adorable kid and the life lessons and the secret passages, there was a lot more going on, as there usually was with the 80s. Before the top half of the countdown, if you're enjoying this ride, hit that like button and subscribe to remember when. We dig up the weird, wild, and completely forgotten stories behind the shows that you grew up watching. And in the comments, let us know the Webster episode that's forever etched in your brain. All right, let's get back to Chicago. Number 7, a contract standoff brought Webster to a halt. By season 3, everyone at ABC knew exactly who was carrying Webster. The ratings made it obvious. The fan mail made it obvious. The merchandise made it obvious. Emmanuel Lewis's parents made it official. With the show firmly established as one of ABC's biggest sitcom hits, Lewis's family and legal team decided that it was time to have a very direct conversation about what the kid actually carrying the series was getting paid. From where they were sitting, the math, it wasn't adding up. The star of the show deserved a deal that reflected what the show had become.
The show ran for 6 seasons and made a huge star out of Emmanuel Lewis.
Negotiations with the network got tense fast. Talks between Lewis's representatives and ABC became serious enough that production temporarily ground to a halt while both sides dug in. Now, for a stretch, the future of one of the network's most reliable hits was sitting in a conference room somewhere, waiting for someone to blink. And ABC blinked. The network wasn't about to watch their biggest draw walk out over a contract, so Lewis received a significant salary increase and a far more favorable deal overall. By 1986, his company, Emmanuel Lewis Entertainment Enterprises, was receiving an official production credit on the show. The kid had gone from being inserted into someone else's sitcom to having his own production company credited on it. It's a pretty substantial upgrade from Hawk and Whoppers. Number 6, ABC copied Different Strokes and then ended up owning it. By 1983, NBC had a certain gold mine on its hands with Different Strokes. Gary Coleman's Arnold Jackson had become a full-blown pop culture phenomenon. He had catchphrases, magazine covers, the works. And when a rival network starts making that kind of magic, the other networks don't sit around admiring it. They start copying it. ABC wanted its own pint-sized sitcom star, and Webster was the result. The formula was familiar enough to make critics squint. Small, charismatic black child, wealthy white adoptive household,
and his adopted parents.
Make a pretty neat family.
Culture clashes, heartfelt moments, and a laugh track working overtime. The similarities were pretty hard to miss, and plenty of reviewers didn't bother pretending otherwise. Some flat out called it a knockoff. Now, to be fair, there were differences. Different Strokes dropped two brothers into a widower's home. Webster centered on a newly married couple with no kids, which gave the show its own distinct family dynamic, but the comparison stuck around regardless. And here's where it gets deliciously ironic. In 1985, ABC actually picked up Different Strokes for its final season, meaning the show that ABC had been accused of copying ended up airing on the same network as its supposed imitation. They spent 2 years chasing Different Strokes and ended up owning both of them. Number 5, Webster survived ABC's cancellation. In 1987, after 4 seasons, ABC decided that Webster had run its course.
Webster was a hit with kids and families, running for 4 seasons on ABC.
Ratings slipped, the network had newer priorities, and just like that, the show was done. Except it wasn't. Paramount Television had quietly built a safety net into the show's contract, a syndication clause that kicked in if the network ever pulled the plug before hitting a certain episode count. So ABC canceled the show, and the clause activated, and Webster simply kept going. Starting in the fall of 1987, brand new episodes began airing on local stations across the country through first-run syndication. Same cast, same show, same tiny star, just a different address. The strategy worked better than anyone had a right to expect. Younger audiences were still showing up. Local stations were hungry for reliable family-friendly programming, and Webster quietly added 2 more seasons and 50 additional episodes to its resume. By the time production finally wrapped in 1989, the show reached 150 total episodes, a number that plenty of sitcoms that never got canceled in the first place never hit. Most shows, when a network drops them, that's the end of the story. But this one, it just changed the channel and kept running. Number 4, Hollywood refused to see Lewis as anything but a little kid. When Webster wrapped in 1989, Emmanuel Lewis stepped off the set and walked straight into the wall that has stopped more child stars than any casting director ever could. Hollywood still sees them as a kid from a show. 6 years of playing Webster Long made Lewis one of the most recognizable faces in 1980s television.
The show made Emmanuel Lewis a fixture of the 1980s.
But that recognition had an expiration date, and the industry wasn't sure what to do with them once it passed. Most young actors age out of their cute kid roles naturally. Puberty arrives, the baby face disappears. Lewis's appearance, though, it didn't change enough to make the transition easy. Casting agents kept running into the same mental block. He still looks like Webster. So the work that he found leaned heavily on exactly that. Cameos on Family Matters, Moesha, Malcolm and Eddie, usually playing just himself. A greatest hits tour with no new album. Eventually, Lewis stopped chasing an industry that had already made up its mind. He enrolled at Clark Atlanta University, he earned a theater degree, and poured his energy into his own production company rather than waiting for Hollywood to see him differently. It's a wall that a lot of former child stars never found a way around. Lewis, at least, had the sense to stop running at it. Number 3, Webster fired Jerry Seinfeld after just 1 week. Before Seinfeld became the man behind one of the most successful sitcoms ever made, he had a brief and deeply unglamorous chapter in his television career.
Yeah, like Bizarro Superman. Superman's exact opposite.
He got fired from Webster after 1 week. Seinfeld was still a struggling stand-up comic trying to find his footing in TV writing when he landed a spot on the show's writing staff early in the series. It looked like a legitimate break. Network sitcom, steady paycheck, foot in the door. 1 week later, he was out. None of his material ever made it into an episode. Whatever Seinfeld put on paper during that week wasn't what the producers were looking for, and the whole experiment ended quietly before it ever really started. And then, in 1989, Jerry Seinfeld launched a little-known show called, well, of course, Seinfeld, which went on to run for 9 seasons, win dozens of awards, and permanently rewire what a sitcom. Number 2, Emmanuel Lewis and Michael Jackson were actually close. And at the peak of Webster's popularity, Emmanuel Lewis was one of the most recognizable faces on television. So when the 1984 Grammy Awards rolled around, the night that Michael Jackson won 8 awards in a single evening, the 2 most famous men in entertainment ended up in the same room, and they hit it off immediately. Lewis and Jackson formed a friendship after that meeting, and it went well beyond the usual celebrity photo op handshake. Lewis became a frequent guest at Neverland Ranch, made trips with Jackson, and by all accounts, was treated less like a famous acquaintance and more like family. Lewis later described Jackson as something like an older brother, someone who understood on a very specific level what it meant to grow up entirely inside the spotlight with no blueprint for how to handle it. 2 kids from completely different worlds who'd both skipped the normal version of childhood in exchange for fame that they didn't fully ask for. And when Jackson's reputation came under fire in later years, Lewis didn't quietly distance himself the way that plenty of others did. He remained one of Jackson's most consistent and vocal defenders.
And Lewis was quick to defend his friend last year after the airing of Martin Bashir's
publicly speaking about their friendship long after it was fashionable to do so. Number 1, Lewis was 12 playing a 6-year-old and 18 by the finale. Audiences spent 6 seasons watching Webster Long stumble through childhood, learning life lessons, causing chaos, just being generally adorable. The whole act was completely convincing. It was also completely fictional in ways that nobody fully appreciated at the time. When Webster premiered in 1983, Emmanuel Lewis was 12 years old. He was 12, playing a 6-year-old. But thanks to his naturally youthful face and unusually small stature, the illusion held up so completely that most viewers never once questioned it. The kid looked the part, played the part, and nobody did the math. And the gap just kept quietly widening. Season after season, Webster Long stayed frozen in time as a young kid figuring out school and family life, while the actor behind the character kept aging out of that reality entirely. By the time the series wrapped in 1989, Emmanuel Lewis had just turned 18, legally an adult, old enough to vote, sign his own contracts, and drive himself to the studio, while still playing a child on television. For most of its run, one of the most celebrated child sitcoms of the 1980s was starring someone who technically hadn't been a child since the first season of Different Strokes. The illusion, it never cracked. The audience never noticed, and Webster, he just kept being Webster. And there you have it. 15 weird and wild facts about Webster. Which one surprised you the most? Well, drop it in the comments and share this with a friend who still remembers that theme song. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, this is Remember When.